I'd sold shoes. I'd worked in some data, worked for some heavy data companies. And so I knew SQL, I knew customer service, knew how to do those things. I mean, I'd even waited tables. I still knew that I kind of wanted to have my own thing and run my own business, but I wasn't sure how to get there and, didn't grow up with that. So didn't have a way of doing that or knowing how to get there. I got lucky in that the man who was running MoneyWise when I got here had the opportunity to in the early 2000s to kind of hop into the dot-com boom and start another business. And the original owner of this business came to me and said, "I know you're young, but you've got talent. Will you run this business for me?" So I ended up as the CEO of a business at 26 or 27 with no college degree and not a lot of experience and not a lot of skills.
Welcome to A Founder's Life. I'm your host, Leo Gestetner. On this show, we dive into the real stories behind the highs and lows of entrepreneurship and how we pursue a more balanced and meaningful life along the way. This podcast is sponsored by Thankz, helping founders like us scale with reliable remote talent. Email founders@thankz.com, that's THANKZ.com, with the subject line A Founder's Life, and you'll receive $1,000 off your first month. Now, I'm excited today to be joined by Sean Shanks. Sean, would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, I'm Sean Shanks. I'm the president and CEO of MoneyWise Payroll Solutions. We are a local payroll service provider located in Charlottesville, Virginia. We serve clients in currently 39 of the 50 states, doing payroll for about 450 small to medium-sized businesses, serving about 14,000 employees.
Wow, thank you. And talk to us a little bit about your journey, and both in terms of your journey that brought you up today, what your business does, which you've just said, but some more around what it does for your customers. And, you've got an unusual story in how you ended up as an entrepreneur and your journey through your current business as well.
Yeah, and I mean it is a little interesting. I was a bit of an entrepreneur as a kid. I had in the US you were able to have local paper routes, so I delivered, sold and delivered the local evening news. And when I gave up my newspaper routes, I had the largest paper route ever. It became 8 different routes. Most people didn't want to manage the amount of work that I was doing. So when I left that, it became 8 different routes. I bounced through a lot of trying college, trying work, managed to just figure out how to kind of fail forward. Get a job, work a job. People see that I have greater talent, go to the highest level that they'd let me go at that company, leave, end up at a new company slightly lower than I was, one that I'd left the previous company, but higher than I'd started the previous company. I kind of worked through a number of those situations, scratching and clawing kind of my way to a living. Ended up in a situation here at MoneyWise where they were looking for somebody who had customer service experience and who knew a little something about SQL databases, because payroll is largely about providing great customer service and understanding how to do data. So it felt like at the time that kind of a job, and it was a job that was kind of tailor-made for the jobs that I'd had, right? I'd sold shoes. I'd worked in I worked for some heavy data companies. And so I knew SQL, I knew customer service, knew how to do those things. I mean, I'd even waited tables. I still knew that I kind of wanted to have my own thing and run my own business, but I wasn't sure how to get there and, didn't grow up with that. So didn't have a way of doing that or knowing how to get there. I got lucky in that the man who was running MoneyWise when I got here had the opportunity to in the early 2000s to kind of hop into the dot-com boom and start another business. And the original owner of this business came to me and said, "I know you're young, but you've got talent. Will you run this business for me?" So I ended up as the CEO of a business at 26 or 27 with no college degree and not a lot of experience and not a lot of skills. And I learned on the job, and I failed on the job. We grew this business together. Ultimately, the original founder of the business passed away suddenly about 10 years ago. And we were in the middle of trying to figure out how I would be his succession. It was pretty clear that I had the skill and the makeup to run a small business, to kind of take that entrepreneur founder's kind of role, Neither of his kids wanted to do it. So we were in the process of trying to figure out what that would look like, although nothing had really been set in stone when he passed away. And so, it took 4 or 5 years to ultimately to buy out his widow, to kind of take over. We didn't have a great plan. We didn't have a buy sell agreement. We didn't have any insurance that would have made that easier. So I managed to bring on an investor and kind of buy out his widow for a good deal for her. And then a couple years later, I was able to buy out the investors so that I could really stand on my own 2 feet and run this business. And it's not an accidental entrepreneur. It was always the hope. But I did really get to, instead of building something from the very beginning, from the very start, I got to take something that I had spent 10 or 11 years shaping and growing, and take it over and continue to shape and grow it and build it and turn it into not something different than it was before, but also something that is markedly mine and not the original founders.
Wow. That's great. And I think as you've been there a long time now.
Yeah, it's I guess we're 2025, so I've been here 24 years. Came in 2001, in July 2001, so just finished being here 24 years, and have probably been the CEO, not the owner, but the CEO or the president for 22 or 23 of those years. And been the CEO and president and owner for the last 4 years.
That's a great success story. Thank you. And what about family? What does family look like for you?
Yeah, I'm married. I've got three, I hate to call them children. I have three young adults, 17, 19, and 21. My youngest is a senior, it just started their senior year in high school. And my older two children are at our local community college. I'm a return on investment guy. I don't think that school and education is bad in general, but I also don't think it's always worthwhile to pay for an experience when you can get learning. And so, I encouraged all of my kids pretty strongly to spend the first 2 or 3 years after high school figuring out what they wanted to do, using our local community college as a means to do that, being able to stay in our home and have a safe place to launch from. I encourage my kids that if they wanted to work full time, that would be an option for them, because I don't think there's just one path for everybody, and I think it can be easy to kind of get pigeonholed into one direction. And so, my oldest is moving towards probably doing something in cybersecurity and has spent some time, working for me this summer. And then my middle child is likely to end up transferring to one of the state schools. We've got a great program here that allows, if you've done well enough, maintained a certain GPA at the community college, you get a guaranteed admission to one of the state schools, and he'll probably go on and do mechanical engineering, but he's also interning for me this summer.
Great to have the kids want to work with you.
Yeah, they don't want to run the business ever, but they certainly appreciate having the opportunity to do some work with dad.
Nice. And actually, I had a friend who he said to his kids, well, if you go to college in Europe, they were from France, so they could go to college for free, basically, in France. He's like, if you go to college in France, I'll buy you an apartment. I mean, that's US education for you.
Right.
The sheer
Right.
cost. It's like you can spend the money on education, or you can have your first apartment. Yeah, a little obviously an opposite rather than, but still. And talk about sort of how health looks for you.
Yeah, honestly, it's a thing that off and on I've struggled, right? It's not a thing that I paid a lot of attention to early. I fell into, and I hate to call it this, but I fell into that standard American mindset of, work hard, work long. The longer and harder you work, the better and more successful you must be. And my health suffered for that. I don't mind saying this out loud. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I haven't had any alcohol in nearly 18 years. That was something that I carried into the beginning of my working life, and so I worked hard and played hard, but that meant partied hard, and that wasn't sustainable. That wasn't good for my family. That wasn't good for my health. That wasn't good for the business. So now I have a very, very structured bit of of training that I do. I actually train to do triathlons. I've done various different events over years. I've raced bicycle, but current focus is on triathlons. I tend to train 5 to 7 days a week, but not a lot on any given day. Rarely more than an hour and 15 minutes at any given time. I throw in a little bit of strength training, cross train with a little running, swimming, and cycling. Try to sign up and complete a couple events a year just to keep me motivated to do the things. I still probably fail the most at nutrition. You get busy and you work through lunch, and that has a knock on effect. But I tend to do a lot of my health data driven. And I know that you work with a company that does that, but I've worn a Whoop strap for probably since 2019. So I've got a good sense of my sleep and my recovery and my overall cardiac health, day in and day out for the last 5 or 6 years, and that's important to me. I say to other founders and small business owners and some of my colleagues, like, the single greatest risk to my business is my personal health. And that's actually meaningful to me, right? Having and it with the previous owner, it was a freak genetic thing, but living through the owner of the business you work for having a heart attack certainly changes your perspective on how important health and keeping some level of life balance, a balanced life. I won't say work-life balance, but having a balanced life is important.
Definitely. We'll get into that in about 2 seconds. Well, what do you like to do for fun? And then and you might as well then lead into how you define a balanced life and that overall balance.
Yeah, what do I like to do for fun is a great question. I love music, movies, and books, so I read a lot. I read both. I'm almost always have some fiction and some nonfiction that I'm reading at all times. I have my background blurred out, so you can't see that I've got a stack of records behind me. I have a record player in my office. I will spin full albums here at work. I also probably have an eighth of my record collection here, and the rest of it is at home. Often sit down and enjoy listening to a full album start to finish. I will take anybody's recommendation on music. And if I'm not sure I want to buy it, I will stream the whole album off of Spotify first. And if it's good, I'll buy it. I've got a pretty eclectic set of tastes, and then I do enjoy a good movie. So I do like to go to the movie theater. I actually also like to go to the theaters. Those are some of the things that I do for fun. When I think about a balanced life, there was it's probably in some form of scouts when they talked about when somebody gave an example of how to fill up a jar, right? And they fill it up with a whole bunch of big rocks, and is the jar full? And of course it looks full. And then you put small pebbles in, and well, yeah, now of course the jar is full. And you put sand in, and well, and the jar has to be full, and then you could still fill it up with water, right? And when I think about balance, I think about putting the big things into my life first. What are the things I have to do? I mean, that's making time for everything that has to happen at the business. And that one is the one that I probably have to set a time frame on, a time block on, and say, it's a hard boundary of, no more, probably for me, no less than 35 hours a week to feel connected and stay in, but probably no more than 45 hours a week, 48 hours a week of actual in the business. That doesn't include, any time I'm using for professional development, reading, but I can't sit here all day and work. I don't remain effective. There's got to be time outside of that. I block out. I'm the guy who schedules his workouts. They're on my schedule. If you looked at my calendar, you'll see most of my workouts already on it. Some days they're not. Some days I leave it open. But I have a training calendar. I know what I'm supposed to do each day. And some days will be a little bit more of, well, if I wake up feeling really great, then I'll put the workout in the morning. Otherwise, it'll fit in this evening block. But my schedule for the week already has 5 of my 8 workouts, planned workouts on it. I have a dedicated time that I spend with my family. Saturday night is always family night. We do family dinner and we play some kind of game or watch some kind of movie together. Those aren't the only times that I spend with my family, but we make a specific deal for Saturday night, Sunday morning breakfast, and Sunday dinner are week in and week out, almost always spent together doing some, sharing a meal and spending time together. During the week, all of us are going different directions between school and all the various activities. My wife and my middle child are both competitive fencers, so they're at the fencing center several times a week. My youngest is very into theater and has a small role in the marching band. So they are also often busy, but we do make time to reconnect. And so balance for me looks like putting a lot of structure around. Like I couldn't do balance without structure. And it also involves a lot of checking in, right? Checking in with the people around me. So checking in with my kids. Like, hey, have we seen each other enough? I don't feel like we've connected recently. Can we grab a cup of coffee? Saying to my wife, I mean, we had a conversation this very morning, like, hey, like we've been around each other a lot over the weekend, and I think we haven't had a conversation that either just needs, maybe there's nothing that has to be said, but we just haven't made time to chat and check in. Can we make sure that gets on the calendar sooner rather than later? And unfortunately, with some of the volunteer stuff I've got, it's probably going to be Wednesday. But even acknowledging Jing that it's necessary and needed is important.
Makes sense, definitely. By the way, I'm a big believer if it doesn't get scheduled, it doesn't get done. So my workouts are scheduled for the next 6 weeks so that no one grabs time from my diary when I should be working out, because it's an important part of my life. Talk to me about what has been a pivotal moment in your life.
Yeah, there's been a couple, and I'll tell it in two parts. Um, certainly the moment in which I decided that I could no longer drink the way that I was drinking and that I needed to get sober. And I used some help for that, not rehab, but one of the common programs for getting sober. And that helped me to learn to ask for help. And to learn to ask for structure and care. And so it worked, right? I got sober, a lot of things got better, and then a lot of things didn't get better because you remain the same. You take away the chemicals and you remain a lot of the same person if you don't really realize that there's some habits that are, for me, were selfish and self-centered, and some areas where I didn't know what I didn't know. But because I had put myself in a position to introduce the idea of ostensibly putting a coach in my life. It wasn't a sobriety coach, but working with somebody else, allowing somebody some space to say, "Hey, you're being a knucklehead." Later, I probably was 3 or 4 years sober. No, it's longer than that. Probably 8 years sober when the original founder died, and it was shortly thereafter that I was talking with a man who's become a really dear business colleague of mine, and he said, "Have you ever worked with a business coach?" And that was an idea that just blew my mind. And, I say this to everybody, like, don't be afraid to hire coaches, because every time somebody has said, "Hey, are you an expert at that? Have you considered looking for a coach in that area?" I've been like, "Yeah, Sean, you understand that you're not an expert at everything, and you should seek out experts to kind of guide you along the way." And so it was that conversation, and we were sitting in Park City, Utah, at the end of a conference, and this guy was extolling the virtues of working with a coach and actually working with a business peer group. And he introduced me shortly thereafter to the man who's become the business coach for our business, but also got me introduced to the group of peers that is my peer group that I meet with quarterly that are in a similar business. And that was a pivotal moment and I wouldn't be willing to be humble enough to accept kind of help and outside folks looking in without having gotten sober first. And so those two moments kind of linked together are really truly those pivotal moments that all of a sudden it's like, I don't have to know everything. And in fact, I'm not expected to know everything. There are some things I'm good at and are results that I should own, and some things I should let other people own. So that was really important to me. That was a really important lesson.
Sounds like some good lessons. And what's one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring entrepreneur?
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of just gave it. Don't be afraid to ask for help. don't be afraid to look for a coach or look for peers. The truth of the matter is if you are an entrepreneur or running a smaller business, you don't have a lot of peers, right? You've got colleagues in your business that are helping you grow your business, but you don't have a lot of peers. Find your peers, surround yourself with your peers, and even if you don't specifically hire a coach, find some of those guys or men or women who have I almost said guys or gals, men or women who've been around, who've done the thing that you're doing, and make friends. Be willing to be vulnerable with them and to learn from them and to admit that you don't know, maybe even occasionally to admit that you're afraid or you're lost. Because I don't think, been my experience, that I can't be successful in a vacuum and on my own. And it has really truly been the other folks, the other people that I've chosen to surround myself that have made me a better leader, and a better entrepreneur and better business owner and a better business person. And so yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help or otherwise surround yourself with folks that are on the same path.
I also think there's a very close relation to how you are in business and how you are at home. So by making yourself a better person, in my belief, it also in many ways makes you a better father, I think you become, as you learn to be present in business, you learn to be present in family. I think these things, our patterns repeat, whether they be in business or personal. So they can repeat for the good.
Yeah, that's a great point, Leo. The number of books I've probably read, 4 or 5 dozen business books over the last 4 or 5 years, and they're really all just, self-help, self-improvement books. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but every lesson I've learned about how to be a better business person has also been like, oh, and I could apply this exact same thing with my children or with my wife or in my friendships. And as you said, right, that which doesn't get scheduled doesn't happen. So seeing some of my friends from high school, it doesn't happen if we don't put it on the calendar. If I don't show up, it doesn't happen. And those same lessons that work for business also work for our personal life. So it's a great point. Thanks for making that.
Well, thank you for joining us today. And how can people find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. You can find our website at www.moneywisepayroll.com. I am also on LinkedIn. You will see lots and lots of videos from me and from MoneyWise Payroll on LinkedIn. So if you want the clearest sense of who I am as a business owner and who MoneyWise is as a business, LinkedIn is probably the fastest place to find us. And I'm just Sean Shanks on LinkedIn, and the business is MoneyWise Payroll.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Leo.
And thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, and please leave a review.